We'll begin by taking a look at the Layout Designer, and we'll see how you would go about designing a new layout from scratch. When you first open the designer with a brand new layout, it looks like this. You can see the main part of the screen holds an image of the layout itself. Across the top are a bunch of tools for manipulating the layout. And over on the right hand side is all of the content that has previously been defined for this question. You can see the various text strings and response controls. This particular question is in Spanish, as you can see. Note that the content is arranged in a sort of hierarchical tree. That's primarily for convenience and organization. The tree structure doesn't impose any constraints on how you do the layout, but it does help you keep track of what belongs with what. For example, we have a response here. The associated data element is Fizlock adder yes. It has a text label of sí, which of course is Spanish for yes. There's a key code, which is somewhat obsolete these days and is used for keying in data from paper forms. And the user interface control that's associated with this response is a checkbox. We start our layout by inserting some dividers to break the layout up into individual cells where we'll be placing the content. We do that by clicking on the rulers where we want the dividers to go, and then clicking the big green plus button to insert the divider. We continue with this until we have the layout divided up the way we want. We can select a group of cells and join them together into a larger cell. This gives us a great deal of flexibility for the overall shape of the layout. Once we have our cells, we can just drag and drop content into them. We can click a content item over in the content pane and then drag it over to the layout where it appears automatically. You can see that once a piece of content has been placed, it becomes grayed out in the content pane to let you know that it's already been taken care of. We continue in this way, dragging and dropping content, inserting and moving dividers, and so on until the layout looks the way we want it. I'm not going to show it here, but there are also some pop-up dialog boxes that we can use to enter the cell dimensions numerically so that we can fine-tune the exact sizes and shapes. When I drop a checkbox control onto the layout, you see this funny looking little green symbol next to it. That's something called an alerter. These are used with electronic surveys in Surveyor as a way of notifying the respondent of a problem, and we'll see how those work later on. Right now they're just symbols that indicate where the alerter would show up if it were activated, and we can set options to specify whether it shows up to the left or the right of the control and so on. I've decided that the space I've left for the checkboxes here is too big, so I'm going to drag this divider over to something more reasonable. But now there isn't enough room for this text string that's at the top, and this overflow situation is indicated by the big red error block. So I'll just connect these two cells together so that the text fits. Now by dragging that divider over to the left, I have reduced the overall width of the layout. So I'm going to use one of the dialog boxes to quickly set the width back to the default, like this. And so now we're back to our original width. I'm going to insert another divider here, so that squishes the other text. And so I need to give it some room to breathe as well. I'm going to insert one last divider here over on the right hand side. And notice how this text in this box automatically reformats itself to fit into the allotted space. Here's an edit control. This will allow the respondent to enter some numeric or text values. Okay, let's take a pause here and preview what the layout will look like. So we'll switch over to the preview mode, and this shows us what the layout will look like when it's finally displayed in Surveyor. So far so good. We can zoom in, get a closer look if we want, scroll around, and zoom back out. And looking at this, I notice that this text here is awfully close to the top edge of the layout. So I'm going to go back to the designer, and I'll right click on this cell and bring up the properties dialog box. And this lists all the different properties for formatting and so on that's associated with that cell. So I'm going to change the padding at the top here to 5 points. We can use inches or millimeters or whatever you want, whatever is convenient. So I'll OK that, and now the text is moved down by 5 points. Let's go back over to the preview, and it looks much better now. In addition to the content that we've defined separately in our content management system, we also have access to various kinds of graphical elements. For example, we have some basic shapes here. I'll drop a little triangle into this cell. In the cell down here at the bottom, I'm going to insert a graphic, and I'll bring up the Properties dialog box and go to the graphic page so I can select which of the various preloaded graphics I want to use. So I'm going to use this signature here. Drop it in. There it goes. Preview it. Looks pretty good. So there we have that. We have a wide selection of border styles and colors that we can use. So I'm going to insert a default black 1/2 point border in this cell that contains the signature. Preview it. Now a 1/2 point border looks pretty good on paper, but in an electronic layout it's a little too thin. You can see it's actually completely disappeared here, although we can find it again if we zoom in. So now you can see that there's a border completely surrounding this cell. But for electronic we want something a little bit heavier than that, so I'm going to go back to the designer here and right click on this cell, and I'm going to set the various border widths to a full 1 point instead of just a 1/2 point. And then just to be different, I'm going to set the right hand border to something really big, like 4 points. And you'll notice that this preview pane up at the top here displays an approximation of what it's going to look like once we're done. So I do that, and the border is updated, and I go back to the preview, and here it looks pretty good even at 100%. So there's our completed layout. Maybe not the most aesthetically pleasing thing that you've ever seen, but you get the idea. So now we just save the layout back to the database, and that will take a couple of seconds. And there, and now it's ready for use in a questionnaire. So that we can see how the layouts propagate through to the final paper and electronic questionnaires, I'm going to make a couple of small modifications to a question that's in the NC 99007 Report of Organization form. Here's the paper layout for the question that we'll use as an example. I'm going to select an empty cell way over here on the left, and then I'm going to bring up the Properties dialog so that I can change the background color of the cell. As you can see here, we have a full palette of colors, so we can customize the appearance however we want. We have a variety of preset colors across the top, some grayscale shades here in the middle, and then some symbolic colors at the bottom. Notice that the one I've selected here is called Econ Foreground. By defining colors via symbolic names, we can make wholesale changes to the color schemes without having to go in and edit each and every layout. So for example, if a decision is made to change all of the questionnaires to use Pantone Green 368 instead of a process cyan like we have here, we can make the change in one place, and all of the questions and all of the questionnaires will automatically be updated. So let's make that change, and now we'll preview the layout, and we can see that the one cell has indeed changed color. Now remember what that looks like, because we'll be seeing it again in just a little while. So I now save the changes to the database, and that takes a few seconds. And now we'll switch over to the electronic version of the same question. I'm going to make a slightly more drastic change here. I'm going to insert a key code into the empty cell, and I'm going to center it both vertically and horizontally. And then I'm going to bring up the Properties dialog and change the background color to something very distinctive. Here. Now that looks sufficiently hideous, but the text is a little hard to read, so I'm going to change the text color as well. So I'll change the text color to white, and there, now that's done, and we'll preview it, and it looks pretty good. So we're going to save that as well. And now we're done with our changes. At any time during all of this, we can assemble and preview the questionnaire as a whole. So let's do that now. We'll look at the paper questionnaire first, and here's what the top of the first page looks like. We can scroll down, And there's the change that we made to the question layout. We go to the second page, and we can see some more questions. And here are some OCR areas here. Another useful feature of the preview is that we can switch on data element overlays. This is a quick validation check to verify that the response areas are in all the right places and match up properly with what the text says. The same information that guides the location of these overlays is used later on during publishing to provide a list of coordinates for KFI and OCR downstream data collection systems. Let's switch over to the electronic view now. And so here's the first page of the electronic version. And when we go to the second page, we can see the change that we made. And we can toggle the data element overlays here as well. Once we've decided that our questionnaire is done, we can publish it. So we'll publish the paper version first. Publishing is normally treated as a batch process, so at the top we have a list of all of the questionnaires that we're going to publish. In this case, there's just the one. And at the bottom here is a status log that shows what's going on during the publishing process and alerts us to any problems. I'm going to go over to the settings page and select how I want to publish. I'm going to publish to commercial offset printing, the result of which is a PDF file. I'm going to turn off DocuPrint. This is what the Census Bureau uses for in-house printing, and turn on KFI. This is how the response area coordinates are computed and saved back to the database. So go back to the publishing page and start the process and sit back and wait. Paper publication goes pretty quickly, typically taking just a few seconds per questionnaire, and most of the time is actually consumed in reading and writing to the remote database. Still, it's a bit like watching paint dry. Here we see there was a warning where the publisher couldn't find a particular folder that was specified, and so used a different folder instead. Here's the same kind of warning again. And now we're done. If this were a more typical publishing run with lots of questionnaires, we could start the process, then go have our coffee break, and then we could come back and we'd look at the status column here and verify that all the questionnaires published correctly. If there were any failures, then we could go down to the log and look through it and see if we could figure out what went wrong. Electronic publication is even more exciting to watch than paper publication. It takes about 3 or 4 minutes per questionnaire, so I'm going to do a bit of time-lapse magic here to keep you from getting too bored. Here you can see a couple of warnings that have popped up because of some behavior or data element mismatches. But we will skip over all of this, and then you'll get to see the end result. And here we are at the end, and you can see that we have in fact successfully published the questionnaire. So now let's run Surveyor to see how an electronic survey is handled. I'll just start the application and select a survey to download here. Enter my credentials. And away we go. Now normally we'd be downloading the form definition packages from the internet as well as the survey itself, but I've set a flag to download them locally so that we can see the changes that we made to the NC 99007. After Surveyor has loaded all of the survey information, we are presented with the welcome screen, which gives us a warm fuzzy feeling and gets us into the mood for filling out the survey. Notice that there are some hyperlinks so that we can click to get more information and so forth. Incidentally, the welcome screen is laid out using the same layout designer that we use for the questions and questionnaires. Next, we'll move on to the inbox view. The inbox view provides us a synopsis of all of the questionnaires that are contained in the survey. This is a test survey instance that I'm using here, and so it has quite a few questionnaires in it. In reality, a small business would typically get just 1 or 2 questionnaires, although a large retailer might get several thousand, one for each retail location. We can load multiple surveys into Surveyor at once, and if we did have more than one survey loaded here, we'd see the different surveys listed over here on the left-hand side. We can now select the NC 99007 questionnaire, which is the one that we modified earlier, and we can look at it in the form view, which is the same fill-in-the-blanks representation that we've already seen in the previewer. So here's the first page of the questionnaire displayed in the center of the screen with some additional information around the edges. At the bottom is a box that lists all the errors and warnings that we have, and we'll take a closer look at that in just a moment. At the top is a reminder of which establishment we're currently entering data for, and on the left is a list of the pages in the questionnaire. If we click on the next page, and there is the change that we made earlier in all of its pink glory. So let's fill in some data here. I'm going to click up here in the street address field, and then I'm going to switch over to the workbook view. And the workbook view has all the same data that the form view does, but it's now in a spreadsheet format instead of a form. And you'll notice that the highlighted data element is exactly the one that I was on in the form view. So for example, I switch to the Dow Jones field here and go back to the form view, and now that one's highlighted. So Surveyor keeps the two views perfectly in sync. The form view has, in addition to the data elements themselves in a pretty raw form, it also has some hints for all the different fields. Since there's no form to give you any instructions, it has to have some hints up here to tell you what's going on. The different forms have different sets of data elements, so each one is displayed separately here in the view. There's also a view called All Locations. This is sort of a condensed view of all the forms in a format that shows just the high priority data elements for all the different forms. Let's go back to the NC 99007 here and click on Dow Jones and go back to the form view. And now I'm going to review the form so to see if there are any errors or warnings. So to review the form, all I have to do is click the Review Form button, and I can see that I've got a couple of warnings. And here you can see how the alerters work. I can click on the alerter now to tell me what the problem is here, and it says that I need to please complete item 1A. So 1A is the set of checkboxes here, so I click on that. And one of the alerters went away, but the other one's still here. Actually, what happened is that the original alerter went away, but now there's a new one. And so now it's asking me to please complete item 1B. And I can click on this hyperlink here, and it will take me to the problem area. So I have to select one of these checkboxes. So I do that, and now all those alerters go away. I still have one warning left though. Let's go over to the workbook view to look at what that warning is. And we can see that we also have alerters here in the workbook view, and I can click on them and it'll tell me what's going on. Please complete this item as well. So I will do that. And that fixes that problem, but that in turn causes a new problem. So I have to fix this one here, and I go up to the hint here and says, is this establishment's physical location the same as the mailing address? So I'll click yes, and now I'm done. I've fixed all the errors and warnings for that form. So now let's go back to the inbox view, and now I'm going to review all the forms. And here we can see that there are quite a few errors and warnings that I need to take care of. I can see them summarized this way, or I can go over to the errors and warnings view and I can see the list in all its glory. Kind of discouraging to see all these errors that I have to fix. So now I'm going to go to the form view for all these different forms, and I'm just going to go through and quickly fix the errors. You notice that the alerter for an error has a much more threatening symbol. I'm going to go ahead and fix all these errors so that we can go ahead and submit this form. Here's an example of an automatic computation. I'm going to enter some numbers up here at the top, and you can see this total here is computed automatically. We have several of those throughout the forms. So I fixed all the errors in this form. I'll go on to this form as well. Oops, I missed one. And now this form shows an example of a repeating group. I'm going to close down some of these panes to make it a little bit obvious what's going on. Here we have a form that represents a multiple set of locations, and 3 locations in this case, and I have to fix the problem in each one of those locations. So I'll click the checkbox there to fix that one, go to the next location, and so on until I'm done. I can bring these panes back up so that I can see them. Go back to the inbox, and now all we have left is warnings, and the warnings won't prevent us from submitting the form. Let's submit the data now. Now normally we'd submit directly to the Census Bureau servers, but here I'm going to submit to a local file so that I can look at the data. The submission system lets me know that I have lots of warnings and tries to convince me to fix them, but I'm not going to. I'm going to continue on here, and I have to fill out the certification form that asserts that all of the data that I've entered are in fact correct. I click next, and now I'm all done, and I've submitted all of my data. We'll take a closer look at the data in a moment, but first I want to show you one of the other features of Surveyor. We can export the data to an Excel spreadsheet and make modifications there. I'm going to just choose one of these forms here. And that's done. Again, this doesn't make much sense for a small business with a single location, but it is useful for a large corporation with lots of data to enter, since a big corporation will often already have the data in some kind of spreadsheet form already. So let's open the spreadsheet that we just exported in Excel. It starts off with another welcome view for some more warm and fuzzies. The next page is a complete data dictionary that describes each of the myriad data elements and what they mean so that the respondent can map those concepts to their own data. And then the next page shows the beginning of the actual data, and it looks basically the same as the workbook view in Surveyor. I'm going to change one value here, which is the name of the company, and then save the spreadsheet back to disk. So we're now back in Surveyor, and so let's import that data from the spreadsheet. So I'll select the spreadsheet file, click the button, and it just takes a second and we're done. And now we can see that the change is present here in the inbox view, also in the form view, and finally here in the workbook view as well. Let's now take a closer look at the format of the survey data as used by Surveyor. The input to Surveyor is something called a survey manifest, which is just an XML format file that describes the given respondent's survey in a way that Surveyor can understand. At the very top, we have various fields that tell Surveyor where to look for info, where to submit response data, and so on. Next is a list of the questionnaires that Surveyor will need in order to administer the survey. Following that, are some templates that Surveyor uses to format the inbox, the all locations display in the workbook view, and also the errors and warnings view. This allows us to customize those views for different surveys without having to touch the actual Surveyor code. Following that are some more templates here for spreadsheet export. And finally, there's all of the pre-listed data. This is the data that's already in the questionnaires when the respondent receives them. Things like names and addresses, prior year data, and so on. And that makes up the bulk of the file. You will recall that we submitted a survey just a few minutes ago. And what is the format of that submitted data? As it turns out, it's exactly the same as the input manifest, except that it now has more data in it. The biggest advantage of doing it this way is that it allows us to look at the data simply by loading it back into Surveyor. And if we want to, we can continue working on the survey and then submit it again later. So here's the submitted manifest. At the top, it looks essentially the same as the input manifest, but when we get down to the pre-listed data, we see several new entries. For example, here is the data that I entered into the certification form. You can see the name, the title of the respondent, and so on. And then if we go way down to the bottom here, here's all the data that I entered into our favorite NC 99007 form.